I'm Brad Roos, and welcome to the prologue, if you will, of Storied History. I'd like to take this first video to introduce myself and give a bit of backstory about what I'd like to do with this channel, followed by a shortened version of the types of videos I'd like to do. History has been a topic that's always been special to me. Although I have vague memories of the fall of the Berlin Wall, the revolutions of the Warsaw Pact countries, the end of the Soviet Union, and the First Gulf War as things that were happening, I think the best time to date that fascination is the fall of 1990, when my sister asked me to watch Reading Rainbow with her. This particular episode about Sunken Treasure happened to have an interview with Robert Ballard, who was the man who found the wreck of the RMS Titanic in 1985. And this interview had a quick primer on the events of the disaster. Although I've diversified a lot in the 3 decades since I saw that interview, I've always had a soft spot for the story of the Titanic, and frankly, I think I always will. I have to say that my grandparents are also responsible for this. On my mom's side, I should stress, because I never got to know my maternal grandparents. They died when I was quite young. My grandmother got me a book about the Statue of Liberty and the efforts to restore her for her centennial in the 1980s. And this turned out to be probably the most influential gift I've ever gotten, because it inspired a lifelong affection for New York City, and it also inspired me in terms of what I wanted to do with my life. In fact, that poster behind me is from that book, and the book is right over there, 30 years later. As for my grandfather, he served in World War II in the European theater. He was a B-17 bomber pilot. He did his 25 missions, and then he returned to the States. He didn't really talk about his experiences with my mother or my uncles, but little me asked him questions, and we talked for hours, several days, about his experiences. And hearing firsthand those stories and listening to actual history like that was another inspiration. So for me, it's not just learning about history, it's also talking about it. And I get that from several members of my family, whether they meant it or not. Academically, I hold 2 degrees, a BA from Susquehanna University in Pennsylvania and an MA from Fordham in the Bronx. My BA thesis was about the 19th century American political cartoonist Thomas Nast and his feud with the political machine politician William Tweed, or Boss Tweed, who ran late 19th century New York. A mission, by the way, he was successful at, to the point that Tweed himself said that Nast's cartoons were the main part of his downfall. My master's thesis was a look at the development of Rockefeller Center and the original World Trade Center. And I used that to argue that while the Rockefeller family was the main financial backing for both projects and the draw for further finance and development, it was actually everybody else beneath them that really formed what was ultimately built in those 2 locations. After the master's, being where I wanted to be, I stuck around in New York. I had hoped for a career in public history, where you engage with the general public about history, but you might be aware that New York is hyper-competitive. So instead, I ended up as a tour guide. And for the next 5-ish years, I spent my time showing people around several famous locations in the city, including the Intrepid Museum, Rockefeller Center, and, most appropriately, the Statue of Liberty. Of course, you're also probably aware that New York is very, very expensive, and at a certain point, I just wasn't happy with things, so I wanted to try something new. In 2014, I dropped everything, and I do mean everything, and I moved to teach English in the Czech Republic, an industry I had no experience in a country where I didn't even know the word hello. Did it work? Well, a decade later, and I'm still here, and I'm still doing it, and my Czech is better. Trochu. Even though I'm financially satisfied, I miss engaging with people about history. And then I remembered something that I used to do at the Intrepid Museum. We would start our day with something called a tour guide talk, where a tour guide would do a short discussion about something related to the museum or an artifact in its collection. And these talks were mostly for internal consumption, but a few were upgraded to a more professional form for the general public, including my own talk about the Titanic in comparison to the Intrepid, which you can see right here if I get the linking thing right, or down in the description if I can't. So I thought, why not do that? What I'd like to do with this channel is share stories from history. Ones that I personally find interesting, bizarre, comical, or just want to share in a shorter form for laymen. I'm not really looking into doing in-depth detailed stuff because I feel a lot of people think history is just reciting names, dates, and places, and it gives the whole field a bad rap. However, I might do a separate channel for deep diving into topics that really appeal to me, such as the story of the Titanic or the history of New York City. We'll see. At the moment, I'm looking to do this bi-weekly, but if the interest is there in you, my audience, I might expand it to weekly. We'll see. And since you're here, why don't I do a shorter story from the annals of history? I suppose it's only fair that since my fascination started there, that my channel should start with the Titanic. More specifically, this part of her way back here. You probably know the Titanic had 4 of these structures known as funnels, but did you know that only 3 of them actually worked? And did you actually know that that's not really quite true? Funnels have been on ships to remove ash and soot from the engineering spaces ever since steam engines became a thing in the 19th century. But it was only in 1897, with the launch of the German Kaiser Wilhelm der Grosse, that a purposely built 4-funneled liner appeared. She wasn't the first to technically have the title of a 4-funneled liner. That was actually the SS Great Eastern, way back in 1857, after originally having 5. But she never carried passengers with 4, so technically the Grosse is still number 1. Regardless, the thing to keep in mind with ocean liners is that they were part of the nationalist fervor that was gripping European nations on the eve of World War I. So if the Germans had a 4-stacker, and by 1906 they had 5, the French and the British had to have them too. Britain responded in 1906 with the legendary Lusitania and Mauretania, and the French in 1910 with the more modestly named SS France. So by the time the Titanic was being conceived, a ship having 4 funnels was seen as a statement of strength and power. Also, by being painted in a certain livery, you could tell what company owned what ocean liner. So for example, if you were looking at the bright red of the Lusitania, you knew you were looking at a Cunard ship. But if you were looking at the peachy, orangey, fleshy color of the Titanic, you knew you were looking at a White Star ship. You usually hear that the 4th funnel of the Titanic was a dummy, that it wasn't really connected to any exhaust for the boiler rooms at the bottom of the ship. And that is true. It wasn't connected to any of the boiler rooms. In fact, even its whistles were fake. But to say that the funnel served no purpose at all is wrong. A number of spaces were located beneath the Titanic's last funnel, and these included the first-class smoking room, the a la carte restaurant for first-class passengers, the turbine engine room, the hospital spaces, and the galleys that were necessary to feed over 3,000 passengers and crew. So all that exhaust and all that waste had to go somewhere. Why not up that funnel? So while the Titanic's 4th funnel did not emit smoke and ash, it did serve a practical purpose. One other feature it had was a ladder that allowed access from the turbine room up to the very top of the funnel, all 70 feet or 21.3 meters of it. And this led to a rather curious incident at the Titanic's last port of call in Queenstown, or Cobh in Ireland. Just before the Titanic set off for New York and her destiny, passengers enjoying the nice weather on her aft decks looked up to see a face looking down at them. It was the face of a stoker who had climbed all the way up from the turbine room to get a fresh breath of air or maybe a quick look at the rolling green hills of Ireland. The more superstitious passengers on the ship thought this was a bad omen, and as we all know, now that might have been true. Like the rest of its brethren, the 4th funnel collapsed at some point during the sinking, probably a combination of water pressure against its largely hollow structure and the stresses of the ship's catastrophic breakup and final plunge. It ultimately fell off and landed in the debris field that now surrounds the wreck of the sunken liner, all but unidentifiable today due to it being made of lightweight metal and having nearly completely rusted through. Well, I hope you enjoyed that short look at the Titanic's not-so-dummy funnel, and that this video gives you a sense of the kinds of stories that I like to tell and how I'd like to tell them. If you're new here, and you probably are, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And once again, I've been Brad Roos, and I'll see you next time. Take care.